The type of disintegration of central government which the entire world is likely to face someday will give the people the opportunity to build the new world in the shell of the old world. If we look at the collapse of Rome and the emergence of the decentralized polities of the medieval period, I think a similar decentralization is likely to transpire following the collapse of the New World Order. I believe that the principal characteristic of a post-New World Order world will likely be the dramatic reemergence of particularism. And out of this New World disorder, no matter how chaotic it may be in its initial stages, there might evolve a new politico-economic paradigm whereby philosophical anarchism replaces liberal democracy. Likewise, a decentralized political order and a polycentric legal order would obviously generate a high level of responsibility, and the removal of parasitical state bureaucracies from human economic life would in the long run generate greater economic prosperity and corresponding increases in health and living standards and wider dispersion of economic resources, greater wealth. The list goes on. The benefits are infinite. But the point is that this type of scenario would then lay the intellectual, cultural, and material framework for the emergence of a new renaissance of human achievement, a new Greek type or classical Renaissance type period, and a new revolution in science, philosophy, and politics of the type that occurred during the early stages of the Enlightenment. The death of the global state may very well be the catalyst that ultimately leads to the triumph of anarchism, kind of like the execution of the French monarch became the cornerstone of the ultimate triumph of liberal democracy. But what sort of economic order would accompany the political victory of anarchism? Economic decentralization would naturally follow political decentralization, and as these massive bureaucratic nation states that are currently being incorporated into the New World Order collapse and disappear, the corporate powers propped up and protected by these states would also dissipate. And this would pave the way for communities and associations to establish sovereignty and self-determination and to develop their own unique economic identities. Economic resources, from land to industrial facilities to infrastructure to high technology, it would all fall into the hands of particular communities and popular organizations, and then these entities would likely organize themselves into a myriad of economic institutions. It can be expected that workers would play a much greater leadership role in the formation of future economies, as workers' access to resources and bargaining power, both individually and collectively, depending on your community. But the overall result would likely be an economic order where the worker-oriented enterprise replaces the capitalist corporation as the dominant mode of economic organization. I think we'd find a lot of worker-owned, worker-operated enterprises, a proliferation of cooperatives and family businesses, mutual banks of the type envisioned by Green, Proudhon, and Tucker, communal arrangements of the type envisioned by Kropotkin, co-minded enterprises operating as a partnership between labor and management, industries operated by unions or workers' councils in the manner envisioned by traditional anarcho-syndicalists and guild socialists and distributists and council communists and so on. Now, of course, if some groups of workers or entrepreneurs wish to organize themselves into a giant hierarchical formation similar to the traditional corporate model, then that would be their prerogative. No one can stop them. But the underlining point is that the beliefs and culture of particular regions or particular communities would shape the emerging economic arrangements. Land would be worked communally in locations like Central Africa, where traditions of communal ownership are strong. Open marketplaces would abound in regions where cultural precedent existed, like the United States. There may be communities run by the Revolutionary Communist Party, or run by the National Socialist Workers' Revolutionary Party, each with their own factories and their own farms, with adherents of party ideology providing the workforce. And still you'd have other communities that might maintain economic arrangements modeled on the teachings of those figures that their members find most inspirational, whether Gandhi or Gaddafi or whoever. The collapse of the global state and the bureaucracies would lead to the coming to local power of a good many political or cultural elements disagreeable to the liberal elites who dominate the current world order and the people who monkey their values. For example, the disappearance of the nation-state system and consolidation of superstates across Europe likely lead to the proliferation of a wide assortment of self-assertive communities and enclaves led by communist and nationalist, monarchist, racialist, Catholic, Christian, or Orthodox traditionalist, Islamic fundamentalist, and neo-Nazis, even ordinary criminal gangs. And the end of Anglo-Zionist imperialism in the Middle East would lead to the removal of the region's current regimes and the removal of national borders, as these are nothing more than a legacy of previous imperial eras. So, as political dispersion would naturally result in the greater influence of those socio-cultural and ideological elements most disagreeable to the values of modern liberalism, so would economic decentralization inspire a regeneration of those communitarian values that have been suppressed by the forces of global corporatism and its materialist, consumerist mindset. Although an end to these giant bureaucracies of the current nation-state system and the global formulation and overarching system of international state capitalism would on one hand result in a greater economic dynamism of the type sought by these free market libertarians and free market anarchists, traditional anarchists may not like this, but the absence of powerful corporate establishments would have the consequence of the emergence of economic institutions that are much more rooted in organic local and regional cultures. And because of this, they'll be much more beholden to the values and norms of those cultures. So it won't be as bad as the anarchist or communist might imagine. You know, I think the entire panoply of factions who stand in opposition to the New World Order would naturally achieve superiority and sovereignty in specific geographical areas where they're best organized and where they have achieved the greatest level of popular support. And then these factions will then proceed to reorganize their internal political structures according to their own ideological inclinations. And such inclinations might range from the highly liberal or progressive on one hand to the very conservative and reactionary on the other. But I think pieces of the former system would likely continue in certain enclaves or be incorporated into newer systems in the same manner that elements of contemporary American law include remnants of earlier English law. The laws of these communities and associations that emerge following the collapse of liberal democracy and state capitalism and the New World Order will reflect the preferences and prejudices of organic regions and localities to a much greater degree than what's found in contemporary systems of parliamentary corporate social and democracy. This is not nationalism. This is really spontaneous order out of chaos. This is particularism through decentralization and dispersion of power. It's anarchism, with most people not even realizing it and not even acknowledging and appreciating its beauty of design.